Managed anxiety was apparently borderline personality disorder, according to her Google degree. She'd twisted my therapy appointments into some mental affliction and warned him about defective genes, suggesting he reconsider. The wedding was called off by the end of the week, deposits lost, and Madison showed up with wine and tissues to comfort me through the breakup she'd orchestrated. That's when I shifted from angry to clear-minded, like realizing the call is coming from inside the house, except the house is your life and the caller is your sister. I knew Madison's weakness. She pathologically one-upped everything I did. If I learned guitar, she'd learn violin. She was a competitive parasite feeding on being the better version of me. So I casually mentioned my interest in simple living, left minimalism books around, talked about city suffocation, dreams of aurora borealis, showed her Instagram accounts of Alaska van life, sighing at their authentic existence. Madison bit like a starved piranha. Within weeks, she lectured about escaping the capitalist rat race, researching remote Alaskan towns with military precision. I played along as if I could never leave my job, friends, life. This only made her more determined. At family dinner, Madison spread color-coded moving plans like a general preparing for war. She'd found a small town, with the population at 347, no cell towers, internet that made dial-up look fast, and the nearest target a 3-hour snowmobile away. I performed Oscar-worthy concern mixed with admiration. Asked about her job, friends, that yoga instructor she loved. She declared someone needed to pioneer this for us, like she was colonizing Mars instead of moving where competitive ice fishing was the main entertainment. I helped pack, drove her to the airport, even cried, mostly from trying to not laugh when she posted, off to live authentically. 4 months later, Madison's Instagram went from living my best life to when does the sun come back? Real quick. She's stuck in a 2-year lease where the dating pool is a 68-year-old fisherman, a bunker conspiracy theorist, and someone who only discusses seal hunting. She cues emails for when the internet works, begging for visits while wearing 4 parkas indoors. I tell her I've started seeing someone, a therapist actually, helping with my trust issues. Super understanding about anxiety. Couldn't possibly leave now. She can't interfere from 3,000 miles away with an internet connection that buffers on email. I'm sure she tried Facebook stalking him, but gave up after 40 minutes loading his profile picture. Last week she posted about therapy for seasonal depression. Girl, you moved to Alaska. All depression is seasonal there. The therapist suggested her need to control me stems from her own insecurities. She wanted to be the star of my life story so badly. I gave her own spin-off. Too bad it got shipped where even Netflix can't stream. I thought everything was perfect. Until Madison called at 3 a.m. Her voice was different. Calm, almost amused. She said her therapist helped her realize something interesting about the timing of my sudden interest in simple living. Then she laughed. She told me she'd been keeping a journal since moving, documenting everything. Every conversation, every manipulation, every lie I fed her. Said she finally understood why I'd been so helpful with her move. So encouraging despite years of her protecting me. Before the call dropped, she whispered 5 words that made my blood freeze. Your turn to pioneer, sister. I sat in bed at 3:15 a.m., hands trembling as I processed what had just happened. Madison knew. She knew everything. The phone lay silent on my nightstand, but her words echoed in my mind. 3,000 miles away in her frozen prison, Madison stared at her journal, planning her next move with whatever scraps of internet she could harvest. Sleep became impossible. I stumbled to the kitchen at 5 a.m. and made coffee with shaking hands. While waiting for it to brew, I checked Facebook on my phone. Madison had changed her profile status to worried about family with prayer hands emoji. The timestamp showed 4:47 a.m. Alaska time. My stomach dropped. The subtle public positioning had begun. At work, I stared at my computer screen without seeing anything. My phone sat face up on my desk as I checked it obsessively, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Nothing came. Not that day, not the next, not even the third day. The silence was worse than any attack. Every notification made me jump. Every unknown number could be her calling from some borrowed phone, but nothing came. Mom called on the 4th day while I was heating up leftover Chinese food. Her voice carried that forced casual tone she used when fishing for information. She asked if I'd been feeling okay lately because Madison had mentioned some concerns during their weekly call. I dropped my fork, noodles splattering across the counter. Madison had already started working on our parents. I faced a choice. Tell them everything about the manipulation, about how I'd orchestrated Madison's move, or wait to see what Madison would do next. My phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. Madison's number. Her voice sounded eerily calm as she said we should talk when the internet cooperated better. I chose to wait. That night, I pulled out a notebook and began documenting everything I remembered about planting the Alaska idea, the minimalism books I'd left around, the Instagram accounts I'd shown her, every casual mention of simple living. I created a timeline, trying to remember exact dates and conversations. If Madison had been documenting from her end, I needed my own records. 2 weeks passed in tense normalcy. I visited my parents for Sunday dinner, studying their faces for any signs of Madison's influence. Mom served pot roast and asked about work. Dad talked about fixing the garage door. Everything seemed normal until Dad mentioned Madison had sent them a really thoughtful email about family mental health resources. A pamphlet about recognizing signs of crisis sat on the kitchen counter, partially hidden under mail. Madison's Instagram became active again. She started posting old photos of us as children with captions like missing my sister and hoping she gets the help she needs. Each post felt like a small knife. The comments from distant relatives asking if everything was okay made it worse. She was building a narrative, and I was the villain in it. Amy, my friend from college, texted asking if everything was okay. Madison had reached out to her, concerned about my well-being. Amy said Madison seemed really worried, mentioned I'd been acting strange lately. I stared at the message, realizing Madison had somehow found Amy's contact information. The infiltration ran deeper than I'd thought. I went to my parents' house to grab some old tax documents from my childhood room. While searching through my closet, I found my old diary, the same one Madison had used against Brett. Flipping through it, I noticed something odd. Certain pages had faint marks on them, like the traces a scanner light leaves. My hands went cold. Madison had photocopied specific pages before that dinner with Brett. She'd been planning that ambush. During my next therapy session, Dr. Chen mentioned something strange. She'd received a records request that seemed suspicious. Something about verifying treatment dates. The request had felt off, so she hadn't processed it. She couldn't give me details due to regulations, but her meaningful look told me enough. Madison was trying to access my therapy records. Over the next month, Mom's behavior shifted subtly. She started suggesting I seemed stressed, that maybe I needed a vacation. Her observations always came after her weekly calls with Madison. I could trace the pattern. Madison called on Sundays, and by Tuesday, Mom would express new concerns about my mental state. I reviewed old text conversations with Madison, screenshots I'd kept out of habit. Reading them with fresh eyes, I realized she'd been collecting ammunition. A joke about wanting to call my boss after a stressful day, venting about feeling overwhelmed during finals. I wonder what kind of person keeps copies of their little sister's diary pages for years just waiting to use them. Madison's been playing this control game way longer than anyone realized, and now she's trying to flip the whole story around from her frozen wasteland up north. Out of context, these normal frustrations could look like instability. She'd screenshotted conversations conversations that painted a specific picture. Madison's influence spread like ink in water. She began sending weekly check-in emails to our parents. Updates about Alaska mixed with subtle concerns about my behavior. Dad forwarded one to me by accident. Between descriptions of ice fishing and northern lights, Madison had woven in worried observations about my recent personality changes and concerning patterns. My annual work review brought unexpected feedback. The peer review section included comments about emotional volatility and erratic behavior patterns. HR couldn't reveal who submitted the feedback, but one phrase jumped out, concerning lack of accountability. Madison always used that exact phrase when lecturing me about taking responsibility. I scheduled extra therapy sessions with Dr. Chen, careful not to reveal the full situation. I focused on processing feelings of betrayal and learning to recognize gaslighting tactics. Dr. Chen validated my experiences without pushing for details, suggesting I document patterns of behavior that concerned me. During a rare moment of clear internet, Madison video called. Her face looked thinner, her apartment visible behind her. I noticed our childhood photos covering every surface, a shrine to our shared past. She talked about missing family, about wanting to come home to help during this difficult time. Her eyes held that familiar gleam of satisfaction. 3 months into Madison's campaign, I attended an office party with my coworker Benjamin. His wife mentioned she'd been contacted by my sister from Alaska about mommy blog recipes. Madison had found her food blog and reached out, claiming she wanted to surprise me with childhood favorites. The conversation had apparently shifted to concerns about my eating habits and stress levels. Casual acquaintances started asking how I was doing with that specific tone of concerned pity. A friend from church mentioned I'd been added to their prayer list. The grocery store clerk asked if I was feeling better. Each interaction felt like another thread in Madison's web. The slow social isolation felt familiar. This was exactly how Madison had operated in high school, turning my friend group against each other through whispered concerns and strategic information sharing. Jenna, who'd known us both since middle school, noticed the pattern independently. She pulled me aside after book club and said Madison had reached out to her too, but she recognized the manipulation immediately. Having watched Madison operate for years, Jenna offered genuine support. Finally, someone else saw what was happening. Dr. Chen continued validating my experiences during our sessions. Without breaking confidentiality about the suspicious records request, she suggested documenting patterns might help me process what I was experiencing. Her careful words told me she understood more than she could say. The validation felt like a lifeline in the growing storm of Madison's campaign. I learned Madison could only email during specific hours when the Alaska internet cooperated. The delays created a strange rhythm to her attacks. Emails sent at 2 a.m. Alaska time, responses impossible for hours. The technological limitation that I'd counted on to protect me had become a tool in her arsenal, allowing her to drop bombs and disappear. Father called about taxes but mentioned Madison had asked him to keep an eye on me during their last call. His voice carried reluctant concern, like he was fulfilling an obligation he didn't quite understand. Madison had given him specific things to watch for: mood swings, isolation, changes in appetite. He listed them awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the assignment. Madison created a private Facebook group during week 5 of her campaign. I discovered it through my cousin's accidental mention at a grocery store encounter. She'd assumed I was part of the family updates group where Madison shared Alaska stories mixed with concerns about my mental state. The exclusion stung more than I expected. Madison had effectively created a family circle that deliberately excluded me, discussing my supposed problems behind my back. I spent hours that night trying to piece together who else might be in this group. Extended family members who hadn't contacted me in months suddenly made sense. They were getting their information about me filtered through Madison's lens. The realization that aunts, uncles, and cousins were discussing my mental health in a forum I couldn't access or defend myself in felt like drowning in slow motion. My attempts to casually bring up the group with mom failed. She changed subjects quickly, her discomfort obvious. Dad seemed genuinely unaware of its existence, which meant Madison had been selective about her audience. She'd chosen family members most likely to believe her narrative without questioning it. The strategic precision of her campaign became clearer with each revelation. Tim's text arrived on a Thursday afternoon while I was filing reports at work. My ex-fiancé, who hadn't contacted me since our breakup, sent a simple message that made my hands shake. Madison had written him a letter. He wasn't getting involved, but thought I should know. The boundary violation felt like a physical blow. Madison had reached across time and distance to reopen wounds I'd barely healed. I stared at Tim's message for 20 minutes before responding with a simple thank you. Part of me wanted to ask what the letter said, but I knew it would only give Madison's words more power. Tim had moved on, found someone new according to mutual friends. Madison's attempt to drag him back into our dysfunction showed her desperation levels rising. Mom called that evening suggesting I skip our cousin's upcoming wedding. Her reasoning made my stomach turn. Madison would be flying in for it, and Mom didn't want any drama at the event. The casual way she suggested I miss a major family celebration to accommodate Madison's presence revealed how successful the campaign had become. I was being positioned as the problem, the one who needed to be managed. I started keeping a detailed journal of every incident, dating entries precisely. The gaslighting only worked if I couldn't trust my own memory. Each strange interaction, each concerned inquiry, each family event I learned about secondhand went into the journal. The physical act of writing helped anchor me to reality when everything else felt shifting and uncertain. The police station visit proved futile. The officer listened politely as I explained the harassment campaign but shook his head. Family disputes were civil matters unless there were direct threats of violence. Madison's psychological warfare didn't qualify for intervention. I left feeling more isolated than before, understanding that the system couldn't protect me from this particular kind of attack. An online support group for family estrangement became my lifeline. Reading stories from others who'd experienced similar campaigns helped me recognize patterns. The systematic isolation, the concerned trolling, the weaponization of mental health language. Madison's playbook wasn't unique. The validation from strangers who understood without judgment kept me grounded during the worst days. Month 4 brought a revelation through holiday video calls. Madison had been telling extended family about my mental health spiral during virtual Thanksgiving gatherings. I learned this from my Aunt Helen, who called privately with questions. She'd noticed inconsistencies between Madison's descriptions and what she observed during our interactions. Finally, someone in the family was seeing through the fog. Aunt Helen's admission went deeper. During a long phone conversation, she revealed Madison had done something similar to our cousin Rachel years ago. The context was different, an inheritance discussion after our grandfather's death, but the tactics were identical. Madison had positioned herself as the concerned family member while systematically undermining Rachel's credibility. The pattern stretched back further than I'd imagined. Easter dinner became a test of endurance. I attended despite knowing Madison would call during the meal. Sure enough, her name appeared on Mom's phone during dessert. I watched my parents' faces change as they listened to whatever new concerns she was spinning. The loaded questions about my stress levels started immediately after the call ended. I deflected calmly, letting my cousin's young children provide blessed distraction with their enthusiasm about egg hunts. Madison's lease had 18 months remaining, but she'd started planting seeds about needing to come home early. Each email to our parents mentioned the family situation, her worry about not being there to help. The financial penalty for breaking her lease became a recurring topic. She was testing whether our parents would subsidize her early return to continue her campaign in person. The betrayal cut deepest when Mom admitted she'd been keeping a mood journal about me. Madison had suggested it during one of their calls, framing it as a way to track patterns and help me. Mom showed me the notebook, filled with observations about my behavior at family dinners, my energy levels, my responses to questions. Reading my mother's clinical observations of my moods felt like discovering a stranger had been living in her skin. A rare video call with good internet showed me Madison's current state. Her apartment walls were covered with our childhood photos, every surface displaying images of us together. The shrine-like quality of her living space revealed an obsession that had consumed her isolation. She talked rapidly about coming home, about the intervention she felt I needed, about how therapy could help if I'd just admit my problems. Dad started questioning the Alaska narrative during a fishing trip. Madison's turning her apartment into a photo museum while running a cross-continental worry campaign is peak older sister energy gone wrong. She's basically become a one-woman surveillance state with terrible internet but excellent manipulation skills. His casual mention of wondering why I'd made Madison move there showed how the story was shifting. Madison had been planting the idea that I'd manipulated her during a vulnerable time, that I'd taken advantage of her depression to exile her. The reversal of victim and villain was nearly complete in her telling. I discovered Madison had been telling people she was tricked into moving to Alaska while mentally vulnerable. This revelation came from a mutual acquaintance who'd heard the story third hand. According to Madison's new version, I'd preyed on her during a depressive episode, convincing her that Alaska would heal her when I really just wanted her gone. The complexity of her revisionist history impressed me, even as it infuriated. Jenna pointed out something crucial during coffee. Madison's influence only worked on people who didn't see her daily. Distance enabled the deception because people couldn't compare Madison's claims against direct observation. Those who interacted with me regularly saw no signs of the instability Madison described. The gap between Madison's narrative and reality was visible only to those who witnessed both. Aunt Helen provided concrete evidence of the pattern when she forwarded old emails from Madison during cousin Rachel's engagement 10 years prior. The language was nearly identical. Concerns about mental health, suggestions of instability, careful positioning as the worried relative. Reading Madison's decade-old manipulation attempts felt like discovering the rough draft of my current situation. My work friend Benjamin's wife recognized Madison's writing style in the anonymous review. She'd been an English teacher and noticed distinctive grammatical quirks Madison always made, specific comma splices, and her tendency to use concerning as an adjective rather than a verb. This small vindication meant someone at work understood the source of the criticism, even if HR couldn't officially acknowledge it. The support group introduced me to the term emotional abuse by proxy, using others to inflict psychological harm while maintaining plausible deniability. Madison never directly attacked me anymore. She worked through our parents, extended family, my employer, even ex-boyfriends to create a web of doubt around my stability. The indirect nature made it harder to combat and impossible to legally address. Despite my anger, I refused to retaliate by contacting Madison's Alaskan neighbors or employer. The temptation to interfere with her job or housing situation pulled at me during dark moments, but I recognized that would make me no better than her. Maintaining my integrity became a form of resistance against her campaign to paint me as unstable and vindictive. Month 5 brought a direct confrontation via phone. Madison called during one of her brief internet windows, her voice shaking with manufactured emotion. She claimed I'd taken advantage of her depression, that I'd manipulated a vulnerable person into exile. I'd installed a recording app after Tim's text, and captured her admission that she'd been documenting our interactions for months before her move. Her own words revealed the premeditation behind her current victim narrative. Dr. Chen's clinical notes became important when I requested a summary of my treatment. Without breaking confidentiality about specifics, her documentation confirmed my mental health had remained stable throughout our therapy relationship. Having professional validation of my stability felt like armor against Madison's campaign. I kept the summary in my journal, proof against the gaslighting. Extended family members started noticing discrepancies in Madison's stories. Her claims about my behavior didn't match their observations at family gatherings. The more dramatic Madison's emails became, the more relatives questioned the narrative. Aunt Helen wasn't the only one developing doubts. Uncle Robert mentioned to Dad that Madison's concerns seemed excessive given my apparent normalcy at family events. Mom's confession to Dad happened within my earshot during a visit. She admitted Madison's concerns seemed overblown compared to my actual behavior. The mood journal had shown consistent patterns of normal responses, appropriate emotions, and stable interactions. Mom's growing discomfort with her assigned role as spy became evident in her reluctance to maintain the journal. I built a support network deliberately, reaching out to people who'd known both Madison and me long term. These weren't just character witnesses, but people who'd observed Madison's patterns over years. Jenna led this group, but it included high school teachers, family friends, and longtime neighbors who'd watched us grow up. Their collective memory became a shield against revision. Mom forwarded Madison's latest concern email to me, asking for my perspective. She hadn't meant to reveal the full scope of Madison's campaign, but the forwarded message included the entire thread. I read months of Madison's emails painting increasingly dramatic pictures of my deterioration. The escalation from subtle concern to explicit warnings about my dangerous instability showed her growing desperation. My parents' apology for the mood journal came with caveats. They still worried about both daughters, unable to fully dismiss Madison's concerns despite the evidence. Trust had been damaged in ways that couldn't be quickly repaired. I accepted their apology while recognizing our relationship had fundamentally changed. Madison had poisoned the well of easy family comfort. Madison's options narrowed as her concerned sister act wore thin. The monthly emails to my employer had been flagged by IT as potential spam due to their frequency and similar content. Family members started declining her calls after recognizing the pattern of every conversation turning to my supposed problems. Her influence waned as her tactics became transparent through repetition. Cousin Rachel's revelation provided the most damning evidence. She'd kept records from Madison's campaign against her marriage 10 years ago. The tactics were identical: concern trolling, selective information sharing, creating doubt through constant worried observations. Rachel had nearly divorced her husband before recognizing Madison's manipulation. She'd stayed quiet to keep family peace but felt compelled to speak now. I shifted my focus to protecting what mattered most. Instead of fighting every battle Madison created, I concentrated on maintaining my job performance and nurturing close friendships. The acquaintances who believed Madison's narrative were painful losses, but I couldn't save every relationship she poisoned. Choosing battles became a survival strategy. My core friend group rallied as Madison's behavior became undeniable. Even those who'd initially wondered if there might be truth to Madison's concerns saw the pattern clearly now. The sheer volume of her communications, the escalating drama of her claims, the obvious obsession visible in her Alaska shrine apartment, all of it painted a picture of someone whose campaign had consumed them. Madison's monthly concern emails to my employer were now automatically filtered to spam. The IT department had noticed the pattern of similar messages from the same external address targeting an employee. While they couldn't formally acknowledge the the harassment, the technical intervention provided relief. Madison's professional sabotage attempts were being mechanically thwarted. Dad witnessed Madison's mask slip during a phone call. Mom had gently suggested I seemed fine at recent family dinners, and Madison's response was immediate and vicious. Her screaming about Mom's blindness to the danger I represented shocked Dad. The bad connection made her words break up, but the rage was unmistakable. For the first time, Dad saw the Madison I'd been describing. My reputation remained intact with those who mattered, though some peripheral relationships were permanently damaged. The grocery store clerk still asked about my health with that particular tone of pity. Some distant relatives maintained their distance, poisoned by months of Madison's narrative. I grieved these losses while recognizing I couldn't undo the damage to every relationship. Multiple family members independently began documenting Madison's pattern. Aunt Helen started a file. Cousin Rachel shared her old records. Uncle Robert made notes after strange phone calls. Without coordinating, the family was building a collective record of Madison's behavior spanning decades. The pattern was becoming undeniable even to those who'd preferred not to see it. 6 months into the campaign, Madison announced she was breaking her lease early. The email to our parents was dramatic, positioning her return as a heroic sacrifice to help the family situation. She'd found someone to take over her lease, absorb the financial penalty, and booked a flight. The intervention she'd been planning from 3,000 miles away was about to become an in-person confrontation. Our parents received an email from Madison's Alaskan landlord expressing concerns. Her erratic behavior had generated multiple complaints from neighbors about late-night phone calls and strange confrontations. The landlord suggested Madison might need support, unaware she was already planning her departure. This external validation of Madison's deterioration provided evidence even our parents couldn't dismiss. The realization hit me during a quiet moment at work. Madison's campaign had become her entire identity in Alaska. Without her job to focus on, with no local relationships to maintain, she'd made destroying my credibility her full-time occupation. The isolation she'd intended for me had instead consumed her. Her Alaska apartment shrine to our childhood revealed someone trapped in the past. I suggested family therapy to my parents as Madison's return approached. Presenting it as preparation for the challenges ahead, rather than accusation about the past, made them receptive. There's something deeply unsettling about Madison's landlord reaching out with concerns about her behavior. It's like watching someone's carefully built story fall apart from an unexpected angle. We found a therapist experienced in family dynamics and began sessions. Having a professional mediator changed everything. The patterns I'd been trying to explain were suddenly visible to trained eyes. Extended family members started declining Madison's calls. The constant redirection of every conversation to my supposed problems had exhausted even the most patient relatives. Aunt Helen stopped answering entirely. Uncle Robert limited calls to 5 minutes. The family network Madison had cultivated was fragmenting under the weight of her obsession. Truth emerged through consistent behavior. While Madison escalated her claims about my instability, I continued showing up to work, maintaining friendships, attending therapy, and participating in family events without drama. The contrast between Madison's increasingly frantic narrative and my mundane stability became impossible to ignore. Reality has a weight that manufactured concern can't match. Madison booked her flight home without telling anyone. We learned about it when the airline called Mom to confirm a billing issue. The planned surprise intervention revealed Madison's deteriorating judgment. She'd imagined a dramatic confrontation where family would finally see the truth about my dangerous instability. Instead, her secret planning looked like the concerning behavior it was. The email Madison sent to the entire extended family about coming home to save me from myself backfired spectacularly. The dramatic language, the messianic positioning, the barely concealed rage at being questioned, all of it revealed someone whose perspective had become dangerously skewed. Family members who'd maintained neutrality started reaching out to my parents with concerns about Madison. Our grandmother's reply-all response became family legend. Fed up with months of drama, she wrote a blistering email telling Madison she was the one who needed saving. Grandmother pointed out the obvious, that I was fine while Madison was falling apart in Alaska. The matriarch had spoken, and her words carried weight that Madison's campaign couldn't overcome. Madison's flight got canceled due to weather, trapping her in Alaska for another week. The delay gave our family time to prepare. More therapy sessions, more honest conversations, more recognition of the patterns we'd all enabled for years. The storm that kept Madison's plane grounded felt like the universe providing a necessary pause before the confrontation. Family therapy sessions revealed dynamics I'd never fully understood. Our parents had always managed Madison's intensity by redirecting it toward protecting me. They'd unconsciously created the pattern where Madison's identity centered on controlling my life. The therapist helped them see how their conflict avoidance had enabled decades of manipulation. The revelation was painful but necessary. Other targets of Madison's manipulation began reaching out privately. A high school friend she'd driven away from our group, a coworker from her first job who'd experienced similar undermining. Each story followed the same pattern: initial charm, growing control, systematic destruction of other relationships, and finally exile when the person resisted. I wasn't special. I was just the target Madison could never fully discard. I compiled a timeline showing 20 years of Madison's behavioral patterns. Using emails from Rachel, testimony from other targets, and family observations, the document revealed a consistency that transcended specific situations. Whether the context was inheritance, relationships, or career advancement, Madison's tactics remained unchanged. The pattern was her signature, visible across decades. Madison accidentally sent her private journal entries to the family group email. The technology that had constrained her campaign finally betrayed her completely. Instead of her usual carefully crafted concerns, the family received stream of consciousness rants about my evil nature, elaborate conspiracy theories about my manipulation, and detailed plans for forcing me into psychiatric treatment. The paranoia and delusion were undeniable. Madison's Alaskan employer contacted my parents directly after she missed another week of work. The HR representative explained they'd tried reaching Madison multiple times without success. Her coworkers had covered her shifts initially, but patience wore thin when she stopped responding entirely. The termination paperwork would be processed if she didn't respond within 48 hours. Our family therapist identified specific behavioral patterns during our third session. She drew diagrams on a whiteboard, mapping the dynamics between Madison, our parents, and me. The visual representation made decades of enabling behavior impossible to deny. Mom gripped Dad's hand as the therapist explained how their conflict avoidance had created the perfect environment for Madison's manipulation to flourish. Parents faced an impossible decision about Madison's return. The therapist recommended clear boundaries and conditions for any reunion. Dad drafted a list of requirements including mandatory psychiatric evaluation and ongoing treatment. Mom rewrote it 3 times, softening the language each time until Dad intervened. The final version sat on their kitchen table for days, unsigned. The family meeting happened without Madison present. Aunt Helen drove 3 hours to attend. Uncle Robert participated via video call from his office. Cousin Rachel brought her decade-old documentation. Everyone signed the intervention letter requiring Madison to seek treatment before returning home. Even grandmother added her shaky signature at the bottom. Madison's response came through Facebook. She posted old childhood photos with captions implying implying I'd stolen her life, poisoned her family against her, and orchestrated her exile. The posts appeared every few hours as her internet connection allowed. Friends from high school started messaging me, confused by the dramatic accusations mixed with photos of us as smiling children. My Facebook friend count dropped by 12 people overnight. Former classmates, distant cousins, acquaintances from various life stages quietly unfriended me after Madison's posts. I watched the numbers decrease without intervening. Each loss represented someone who'd chosen to believe Madison's version without asking questions. The silence from people I'd known for years stung more than angry messages would have. Core friendships held firm against Madison's assault. Jenna organized a dinner with our closest friends where everyone shared their experiences with Madison's recent contact attempts. Benjamin's wife brought printouts of the grammar analysis she'd done on the anonymous work reviews. The group's unified support created a barrier Madison couldn't penetrate. 7 months into the crisis, my parents' 30th anniversary trip to Hawaii approached. I insisted they keep their plans despite Madison's looming return. The tickets were non-refundable, the hotel already paid for. I assured them repeatedly that Madison wouldn't actually leave Alaska without their financial help. My confidence came from tracking her social media complaints about money troubles. I arranged to stay with Jenna during my parents' absence rather than remain alone in my apartment. We moved my important documents and valuables to her place as a precaution. The preparation felt excessive until Jenna reminded me of Madison's past behavior patterns. Better paranoid than unprepared, she reasoned while helping me pack photo albums Madison might target. Madison appeared at my apartment door on a Tuesday evening while my parents flew over the Pacific. She'd lost at least 30 pounds, her face gaunt from months of isolation and obsession. Her eyes darted constantly, scanning my hallway like she expected an ambush. The designer clothes she'd worn to Alaska hung loose on her frame. She demanded entry with the authority of someone who believed they owned the space. Inside my living room, Madison paced between my furniture, touching objects like she was cataloging evidence. She alternated between accusations delivered in a prosecutorial tone and sudden tears that stopped the moment I looked away. Her hands shook as she pulled out a thick notebook filled with dated entries. She flipped through pages, pointing at specific dates while her voice rose and fell in practiced rhythms. Madison revealed she'd been recording our phone conversations for months. She waved her phone triumphantly, explaining how she'd documented my admissions and manipulations. Her face fell when I explained Alaska's two-party consent laws made her recordings illegal. She'd given me evidence of her own criminal behavior while trying to trap me. The irony seemed lost on her as she frantically tried to delete files. Jenna arrived exactly as planned, using the spare key I'd given her. Her presence shifted the room's dynamic immediately. Madison's theatrical performance faltered with a witness present. Jenna positioned herself between Madison and the door, while I remained near the kitchen, maintaining physical distance. Madison's accusations became less coherent as she realized her audience had doubled. The decision crystallized as Madison's behavior escalated. Instead of calling police for trespassing, I dialed my parents' hotel in Hawaii. Dad answered on the second ring, his vacation relaxation evaporating as I described the situation. They booked immediate return flights while I kept the phone on speaker, so they could hear Madison's increasingly unhinged monologue about stolen birthright and family betrayal. Madison's claims grew more detached from reality as she insisted my apartment rightfully belonged to her. She'd convinced herself that as the older sister, she deserved everything I had. Her notebook pages became props in an elaborate performance where she was simultaneously victim, hero, and avenging angel. Jenna recorded everything on her phone while I maintained distance. Madison showing up 30 pounds lighter with a notebook full of illegal recordings is peak villain energy. Imagine planning your big gotcha moment only to confess to crimes instead. When Madison lunged toward my bookshelf, specifically targeting photo albums, both Jenna and I moved to block her. My parents listened through the phone as Madison screamed about destroying evidence of my crimes. Jenna's steady presence kept the situation from escalating to physical violence. We formed a human barrier while Madison raged about conspiracies and stolen futures. Madison's final manipulation attempt came as threats of self-harm if I didn't confess to crimes she'd imagined. The tactic felt rehearsed, probably planned during her long Alaskan nights. My parents heard every word through the phone connection. Dad's voice cracked as he told me to call 911 if she made any move to hurt herself. The threat lost power when met with practical response instead of panic. Neighbors called police after Madison's screaming and door pounding continued for 30 minutes. She'd locked herself in my bathroom, alternating between threats and accusations loud enough to hear 3 apartments away. 2 officers arrived to find Jenna and me sitting calmly in my living room, while Madison's voice echoed from behind the bathroom door. The security footage from my building's hallway cameras showed Madison's entire arrival and escalation. The officer's professional assessment led to Madison being placed on a 72-hour psychiatric hold. She emerged from my bathroom swinging between rage and tears, demanding the officers arrest me for theft of her life. The security footage, Jenna's witness testimony, and Madison's obvious instability made their decision straightforward. I watched them guide her to the patrol car, her protests echoing off apartment building walls. Madison spent 3 days in the psychiatric facility's evaluation unit. The intake psychiatrist contacted my parents for family history after Madison's initial assessment raised red flags. Years of untreated issues suddenly had professional documentation. The doctor recommended extended inpatient treatment followed by intensive outpatient therapy. Insurance would cover 30 days initially. Our family began months of therapy to address generational patterns. The therapist specialized in family systems and personality disorders. Each session revealed new layers of dysfunction we'd normalized over decades. Mom cried through early appointments as she recognized her role in enabling Madison's behavior. Dad struggled with guilt over years of choosing peace over intervention. 8 months after that first 3 a.m. call, I helped my parents clean out Madison's Alaskan apartment via video call with the landlord. The walls covered in our photos created an eerie museum of our shared childhood. We directed the landlord to pack items while we watched through his phone camera. The shrine-like setup disturbed even him, and he'd seen plenty of strange tenant situations. Finding Madison's journal among her possessions provided the final piece of understanding. Page after page detailed not just her plans against me, but the pain driving them. Years of feeling inadequate, of needing to be needed, of defining herself only in relation to me. The manipulation tactics were symptoms of deeper wounds. Understanding didn't excuse her actions, but it explained them. 1 year later, I maintained careful boundaries while Madison continued treatment at a residential facility. Some relationships never recovered from her poison campaign. Those 12 unfriended connections stayed severed. Certain extended family members remained distant, but my core support system emerged stronger. My parents attended their own therapy religiously, working to break patterns inherited from their parents. Madison sent letters through her treatment team occasionally. I read them with Dr. Chen during sessions, processing the complex emotions they triggered. The letters showed glimpses of accountability between relapses into blame. Recovery wasn't linear. Some weeks brought progress. Others brought familiar manipulations in new packaging. The facility reported she'd stopped creating shrines to our childhood, focusing instead on discovering who she was beyond our twisted dynamic. I learned vigilance without paranoia, boundaries boundaries without cruelty. Work reviews returned to normal after HR documented the source of those anonymous complaints. New colleagues knew nothing of the drama. Life developed rhythms unrelated to Madison's crisis. Jenna and I started a monthly dinner tradition with others who'd survived family manipulation. We shared resources, validated experiences, and celebrated small victories like holidays without drama. The price of peace proved higher than expected, but worth paying. Madison remained in long-term treatment, our parents continued therapy, and I built a life defined by my choices rather than her chaos. Some patterns take generations to break. We were trying. Thanks for letting me wonder about all these interesting moments with you today. See you in the next story. I love you all. Thanks for making it to the end.